Next question. Aren't you all just angry with or hurt by your past church affiliations?
Well, that question has come up a few times, and I think the reason that comes up is a lot of people in life, whether it's a job or whatever, they tend to react to things or be bitter towards something and lash out and try to prove a point, try to get even, try to get revenge. And I guess, who would answer yes to that? Who would say, yes, I'm only saying and doing what I'm doing because I'm a bitter person and I have had a bad experience, quote unquote. Who would answer yes to that? So I'm not going to answer yes to that. I haven't had a bad experience. I've never been ousted from any church in my life. I've never, I've had some, I definitely have. In fact, someone told me that I have more enemies than anybody they've ever known, so I guess I have.
Congratulations.
Yeah, they probably don't know very many people. But, it's not as if all of this is popular or anything like that. But what I'm saying is, in my church experience, and in fact, I really don't know a lot of people that have had really bad church experiences. And most of the people I know of, it's sort of like Peter and John and James, and those guys were called by Jesus. They left nets full of fish on the shore. Guys that have been very successful in business and very successful in their church lives, have been elders and leaders of mega churches and smaller churches, professors at Bible colleges, that sort of thing. People that have been successful in their religious lives as well as their secular lives, not people that have been embittered or running to something. And I think one of the good tests of things is we had a man one time, you'll remember him, that came to us and he'd been disfellowshipped from an assembly here in the city. And he came running to us saying, oh, these guys are terrible, this other church over here is a bad thing, and they've disfellowshipped me, but it wasn't my fault, it was totally their fault. And in his attitude was clearly that he was embittered by his experience. And we actually walked him back to that other church, sat down with the senior minister there as well as an elder, and talked it out with him and pushed him back towards these guys to work it out, because it wasn't entirely their fault. There was definitely sin on both parts, and they both needed to work it out. And so he went back and spent more time with them, and I'm not certain exactly where he is now, but bitterness is not really welcome any more than lust or murder or fear or any of those other things. And so bitterness isn't in the character of Christ. Reactionary attitudes isn't in the character of Christ. That isn't how Jesus functioned. He was courageous against the faulty religious system that used the Bible to make a form and a system, but didn't express the life of God. Jesus was a reactionary, I guess you could say, against that, but it wasn't because he had a bad experience with it. He spent 30 years in it himself. They didn't throw him out or disfellowship him or anything. He wasn't a troublemaker per se, but I think it would be readily identifiable if someone was just wanting to be part of the church here because of a bad experience. It wouldn't be welcome or acceptable. They would need to go back and work that out. And that kind of situation has happened a number of times where we haven't just with open arms said, yeah, come, let's join the reactionary movement. I don't think it's that at all. It's a zeal for the house. And Martin Luther, when he was in the midst of a great upheaval in his day and age, he was one of those guys that faced his universe and looked at it through a different set of eyes and didn't accept what he saw as being a valid model of what God intended. And they threatened him based on history, based on scholarship. They threatened him. They said, how can you, one lowly monk, stand against this whole vast religious system? And he said, hey, I'm not trying to be prideful, but if you can show me in the Scriptures, I'll recant. If you can't show me in the Scriptures, then I have no choice but to go on regardless of the cost. And that needs to be our heart. That sounds a little reactionary, but our desire is to be on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, to do what God said. Now, if in the Scriptures there's a model of something that's acceptable to God, of vast storehouses of people that some are saved, many are not, that come and listen to a speech, and like when Paul was so angry with the Corinthians, he said, your meetings do more harm than good. You think you're taking the Lord's Supper, you're not. He just totally blew them apart, and he was the one that was involved in laying the foundation there. But he said, you guys shouldn't even be having meetings or, quote, services. You shouldn't even be doing it because they do more harm than good. Why? He said, because you're not one loaf. You're disoriented. You're not caring for one another's needs. You're not discerning the body. You're bringing judgment on yourselves, and your meetings are a waste of time. Quit singing. Quit praying. Quit having worship time. Quit hearing sermons. It doesn't mean anything. Not that they even did things that way back then, but just to equate it to today's parallels. He said, don't even waste your time. If you're not going to be one loaf, if you're not going to really be devoted one to another and be one body and discern the body of Christ and care for each other and meet each other's needs rather than to come, have a meeting, and then scatter and live independent lives, if you're just wasting your time and bringing judgment on yourself and on others. That's why some of you are sick and others are dying. So, it's important that we see things the way God sees them and that we build the way God says to build. David saw Uzzah died and was in great distress because Uzzah, if you remember, had tried to steady the ark that was on the ox cart. And he inquired of the Lord and said, man, what's going on here? God, we're trying to bring the glory of God into the holy city. We're trying to do the thing that obviously you would want us to do. And now here's a dead man. What is going on here? And as he inquired of God what the problem was, God showed him that he had not done things according to the pattern. It was supposed to be brought in by men that were chosen by God, the Levites. There was prescribed manner of doing it, not on a Philistine ox cart. The high-tech way to accomplish God's purpose isn't necessarily acceptable to him. It could be strange fire. The fruit would certainly show that, and God's judgment would certainly show that. And the fruit of most of what's happening today, whether it's in a mud hut like we've been in India or wherever it would happen to be in Portugal or Nairobi, the fruit is generally speaking, around the world, is generally speaking bad. There are Christians, there are saved people, there are good things happening, there's no question about that. But overall, the vast majority of people, and as I said a minute ago, 70%, are failing in their walk with God. Christ is not formed in them. The character of Jesus is not being manifested and propagated through them into the world around them, even in their own families and their child rearing. It's not happening for 70% of the people, even though they would want it to. So there's a very good chance the model's wrong. There's something that we're doing wrong here in the way we're approaching it. We're trying to bring God in an ox cart when He has a whole different way of approaching the subject.